Welcome to Break Free and Trust, a redesign for living. Join me, Chris.
And me, Jacqueline, for real conversations about life, death, and everything in between.
Learn to connect with your intrinsic power to grow and heal, how to laugh at your own humanness and not take life too seriously.
Through healthy conversations between the feminine and masculine, you learn how to harness the power of relationship and the mirror to befriend your shadow and to trust that any obstacle that gets in your way is there to help you grow.
Together, working at a practical level, you learn to trust that everything that is happening is for you, your growth, and ultimate freedom.
Our circumstances don't matter. It's only how we relate to them that does.
Get ready to befriend the wisdom of your body and the power of your mind.
Break Free and Trust starts now.
Welcome to Break Free and Trust, a redesign for living. I'm Chris.
And I'm Jacqueline.
And in today's show, Jacqueline and I are going to explore the topic of pleasure seeking. That is pleasure seeking from a psychological and spiritual perspective, in case your minds are wandering somewhere else. So why does the human mind pursue pleasure? Why is there this great demand for comfort? What role does fear play in this dynamic? We'll explore these concepts and more today, and hopefully leave you with a more complete understanding of how pleasure seeking may be impacting your own life, as well as some practical ideas on how you can free yourself from the potential mental prison it creates for you. I'm going to go right at this thing, Jacqueline. Why do we pursue pleasure?
Oh, I thought you were going to go right at this thing. You want me to go?
Oh, yeah. Well, I'm just passing it over to you. That's why I go at it.
Well, for many reasons. I think my first answer to that question is going to be, well, why not? Why would we not pursue that which feels good, right? Biologically, we're programmed to pursue pleasure and avoid pain. And inherently, we're now living in a society, at least in North America, I'll speak to, where our entire society is rooted in pleasure seeking and pain avoidance. So whether it's, if we have pain, there are 14 different drugs that we can take in order to make that pain go away. Every advertisement that's out there is to move us towards something that pleases us, to distract us, to be engaged in a way that leaves us with a giant dopamine hit. And pain is something that we're not taught to be with. There's no advertisements for how to live with, explore, or, a drug for being with pain. There's only everything that our society is rooted in is in the avoidance of it. And so we grow up looking towards pleasure. And ultimately are thrown into places in our lives where pain is inevitable and we don't know what to do with it. Does that answer your question?
It does. And you asked me a question at the start when you said, why not? And I thought about that a little bit while you were talking. And it's like, I think what comes up for me is because there's nothing wrong with pleasure per se. I mean, pleasure is a nice thing to experience, but pleasure seeking is what we're talking about, because I suspect, and I think I'm fairly confident, that pleasure seeking becomes mechanical, because pleasure seeking or pleasure is you're trying to cultivate the senses, a taste, a smell, a feeling, a high. And it's this conditioning to go after that pleasure once we've had it, which makes us more mechanical. I've got pleasure this time. Well, I want more of that. So I'm going to pursue it and I'm going to pursue it. And all of a sudden we become conditioned and mechanical in the way we're living our life to pursue pleasure and to avoid pain. And I ultimately wonder where that leads us.
So I know that the word mechanical for you is coming up from a reading that we did from Krishnamurti.
Mm-hmm.
And I would almost say that in my listening, I would translate that into habitual, right?
Sure. Or conditioned.
Totally. Well, but what's conditioned is habitual, right? So if we do something and over
Yeah.
again. We're
Habitual.
conditioned. Yeah. And yes, I mean, from a previous podcast that we did, we spoke about um, dopamine as it relates to pleasure seeking. And inevitably, the more we seek dopamine hits, the more we need dopamine hits in order to feel pleasure. And more often than not, the bigger the hit needs to be, right?
Yeah. And, in that, yeah, I want to create a distinction here too at the start of this of what is the difference between pleasure and joy?
Hmm.
Because I think this may help us triangulate what we're talking about here.
I can only speak to it as I relate to it, and then we'll see how you relate to it. Do you
Sure.
have something that you want to say around it
I
right
have
now?
some thoughts, but I'm curious to hear how you relate to it first.
So there's a depth to joy that doesn't exist within pleasure for me. So joy is something that um, joy is a state of being. Pleasure feels like the weather moving through. Pleasure is something that we feel and it goes away and we need more of it. Joy is something that we can tap into, and the more conscious and aware we become, the more our nervous system's quiet, the more we tap into a level of contentment, which for me is joy. Feels like the depths of the ocean, whereas pleasure is the weather that moves through.
I
How do
love
you
that.
relate?
I love that. And it's mine's similar, but we use different language. It's like, pleasure is this experience that I can cultivate. It's again, it's a sensory activity that I can create. Where for me, when I sit with it, I find joy. It's almost this uninvited experience that tends to occur when it's unexpected and in a present moment. Like the visual I have is I'm sitting out on a field on a beautiful day, and the clouds have this amazing formation, the wind's going through the trees, and I just have this feeling of spaciousness and expansiveness, and like a tear rolls down my face. That's joy. And the pleasure seeking was going to be, I want that again. I'm gonna my computer, I'm gonna get on Google, I'm gonna find out where the weather and the wind is gonna be just like that, and I'm gonna drive to that place tomorrow to try to get the same thing, and then the next day and the next day. And I think the challenge that pleasure seeking brings in, because it's habitual, is once we start seeking pleasure, we may actually rob ourselves of joy because we're no longer able to be in the present moment for these uncultivated experiences.
So then, if I go back to what you just spoke, I would say that in a lot of ways, pleasure and addiction aren't that different. Whereas joy is a state of being that goes beyond that. I mean, this is going to sound a little bit crass probably, but to me, the difference between joy and pleasure is between love and an orgasm. Right? An
Yeah,
orgasm, you seek, you
beautiful.
feel done, you want more.
Yeah.
Love is something that's constant, that goes beyond that.
I mean, I think that would, if my understanding of sex addiction, having worked with people in that space, that's ultimately the chasing of pleasure along those sense leaves them without joy, without love. It ends in so much pain, as do almost every addiction, which start off as pleasure seeking and they end in the most painful experiences. And I think I even want to soften the term. We're using the term pleasure seeking right now, which I think can invoke, this idea of drugs and alcohol and debauched experiences. I think we can soften a bit from our conversation and say, it's the seeking comfort. It's the avoiding of discomfort, even. It's the moving away from those places that I feel uncomfortable into something else. So it expands the definition of it to maybe excess exercise, the bag of chips, the constantly talking to people on the phone. There can be a whole bunch of things that's taking us away from being in the present moment because it's uncomfortable.
So I would say that it definitely takes us out of the present moment, and it leaves us in a place where we're seeking, we're wanting something different than what is in this particular moment. But I wouldn't say that it's just about comfort, because I think pleasure seeking actually brings us into places where we need an adrenaline rush, where
Mm,
we're jumping out of a plane. We are seeking something other than whatever our current experience is.
right. Is it inherently bad to seek pleasure then?
Hmm. It's an interesting question because pleasure is wonderful. I wonder if it's more about the seeking of pleasure that's the
Mm,
problem and pleasure, right? Because the seeking of pleasure is the seeking for something other than what is. And joy comes from being able to deepen our experience of being in the present moment. Or as Ramdas says, be here now.
yeah. I think the seeking is the key word, and it because again it drums up this visualization of the attachment, right? I'm seeking, I'm grasping, I must have this. And as we talked about, our show is titled Break Free and Trust. And a lot of it's break free from what? Well, it's these seeking moments and grasping moments where, oh, I'm going to seek a certain monetary success. And I find when I get there, well, now I'm going to seek a new level of monetary success or a title or this or that. And pleasures in that category. I'm going to seek this pleasure. But once I have that, I'm not going to be done. It's most likely I'm going to seek a similar experience, but very more likely a more extreme experience if that's what I'm seeking versus the uninvited pleasure experience was like, oh, this is wonderful.
I think pleasure as it unfolds naturally
Mm,
is very much tied to joy. Um, Pleasure as it's something that we need to seek to be outside of our current experience is actually very much akin to the energy of addiction. And it doesn't matter what the addiction is, right? It's, you know, I'm going to use myself as an example, and it's a very simple example, which I'm sure lots of you can actually relate to is, you know, I'm home for the evening. Um, it's a humdrum kind of night. There's nothing spectacular going on. There's, the regular tasks of making dinner, of cleaning up, of, sorting out paperwork, of doing whatever. And when that's complete, I race to go and watch my favorite show on TV. I turn on a movie. I go for a run. I um, pick up a book. I do whatever. Now, if the drive for that is I want to watch a movie, I want to watch a television show, I am ready to read my book, that's great. I mean, there's nothing wrong with any of those things. But if the drive to do that is I'm sitting in this place of idleness and I'm uncomfortable and I don't know how to be in that place. So I seek something to get me out of there. That's sort of a little bit of what we're talking about.
mm,
And I do it all the time, right? Like we all do it all the time. It's beginning to become aware of in those moments of discomfort, which we wouldn't have even qualified as discomfort if you're not aware enough of yourself. Um, can I just sit with myself? Can I just breathe? Can I even maybe sit down and journal if I realize that I am uncomfortable, what it is I'm uncomfortable with? The sensation, the physical sensation in my body, without having to jump out of it. because it is that constant jumping out of our current experience that leads us to seek pleasure. And the challenge with that is that pain, which is an inevitable part of being a human being, is something that can only be avoided for so long. It doesn't go away. And so inevitably, we are going to get to a place where we have to be with ourselves. And the more we're practiced at it, the easier it is.
I want to, you said a lot there. I want to break it down into two different pieces. The way I heard it, there's this one that's habitual distraction, where it's, I'm done with the things I have to do today, and I don't really know what to do next. So I'm gonna fall into this routine of doing these things to keep myself busy. And I think that one it's interesting because that's getting at this. Oh, that's potentially, if not aware, that's what I'm doing. It's a bit of an unconscious way to live our life. So what you brought up in there is this awareness. Okay, I'm going to watch a movie. Now, can I be aware of why I'm choosing to watch a movie versus I'm just doing it automatically because I can't think of what else to do? So just the awareness of being very conscious of I'm doing this now, and I'm making this choice and I'm doing this for this reason could potentially get you out of that habitual behavior.
Mm-hmm.
The second thing you talked about, which is really interesting, and I think a lot about this, is the other side of the coin of pleasure seeking is pain. Mm-hmm. And a lot of pleasure seeking, particularly extreme pleasure seeking, is driven by the avoidance of pain. And that's almost a slightly different. They're related, but it's a bit of a different animal because that avoidance of pain, as you mentioned, it can only be temporary. And it comes potentially at a great cost to us.
So I agree with you 100%. And I think that they actually are more tied than we think. We are so busy doing all the time that I think that being idle, just as an example, creates a tremendous amount of discomfort. And we medicate that discomfort with stuff, with doing, and we value the doing, right? Like we value sitting down and watching a movie together more than we value sitting on the couch and staring at the wall. And I mean, I'm not speaking to you and me. I mean, as a society.
Yeah.
And I think that there actually is, if we were to peel back the layers more and more, there is a subtle pain, which we'll call discomfort, that exists in those moments that if we got more practiced at being with, we would have more capacity to meet pain when it arises than if we're constantly distracting. Like, look at our kids right now as an example. They are not sitting quietly ever. They're with TikTok, Snapchat, something's going 24/7. They don't have a clue how to be with themselves anymore. And so there's a constant distraction. So what happens when big emotions show up, when big discomfort shows up, when pain shows up? They're not practiced at working with that. I'm not saying that we're so much better.
No.
But
yeah. I used to be terrible. I'm better now, but yeah.
They're not practiced at it.
It's interesting. I appreciate how it's a continuum. It's not a this or that. It's discomfort or it's boredom, whatever that is. That's being uncomfortable with the present moment, just the way it is. And it could be because of extreme pain, or it could just be because I'm not good at sitting with my thoughts. And all these activities take us out at the present moment. And of course, the present moment is the only thing that's actually real. it's the only thing that truly exists. And I'm sitting here right now. I'm looking out the window and we're on Bowen Island into a forest, and this reminded me of being in Africa on our last podcast, just sitting there in a jeep, looking around, going, "Why is my mind wandering when I'm at the place that I couldn't imagine wanting to be more in this scenery? Why is my mind trying to distract me from being right here, right now?" But our whole society seems to be about avoiding being in the present moment and being with the joy of what could be happening right now, because joy is only in the present moment, and we tend to rob ourselves of that.
And so then we seek happy, right?
That's right.
And
We
happy,
seek an idea of happy.
but happy is no different, I don't think, than that idea of seeking pleasure, because it's
Yes.
fleeting. It's
Yeah.
fleeting. I'm listening to what you're saying, and I'm thinking about this morning. I started a practice yesterday of doing an hour of chanting every day. And I watched myself go to, well, wait a minute. I have a client, then I need to get ready for this podcast. And my mind started wandering, and it's this constant like, be here now, because you're doing this right here, right now. Can you train your mind to find joy in this moment? And it's a practice. And it's a practice that we really were not taught. And yet, all we seek, all we really want is joy.
Yes.
And we're finding it for seconds in these, what we think of as joy. We're tapping into for seconds.
Finding
The
dopamine.
pardon?
We're finding dopamine.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's something way deeper than that. That's a state of being that until we learn how to be in the present moment, we're going to be seeking for the rest of our lives.
Yeah. And, you mentioned Krishnamurti's name earlier, and I want to bring him back into this too, because you know, he's a spiritual teacher, but he's sort of aspiritual. And he really talks about, like, almost like we're discussing here, is the biggest problem that humanity faces is its inability to be in the present moment and connected to everything. And he says the biggest culprit, the biggest challenge is our how we deal with time. Now, and that there is no time in the present moment. It's just now. And, getting all metaphysical, time's an illusion because it's only ever now. But we create time with our minds. There's the past, which we can have all sorts of traumas and things we wish we did differently, and all that baggage that follows us along that can pull us out of the present moment as we think about all those things and how we wish things could have been different. That's one aspect, and we get much better at processing that. But he would talk about the real culprit is what he calls psychological time. That is time that's never going to exist, because it's all our fear-based worrying about the future and all the things that could go wrong and all the things that could happen and all the things you might have to do. Our minds are bombarded by these two dimensions of time. No wonder it's hard to just sit here and be here now. And it's the cultivation of turning those pieces off and dealing with them. We're not turning them off, no. Facing them, dealing with them, processing them, and integrating them, that allows us to be free in the present moment. But the more we distract ourselves and numb ourselves out from ever looking at those things, they're constantly going to be ready to pounce on us the second we stop distracting ourselves. And it's torture.
Yeah, I'm thinking a little bit about, I was just on the phone with a client before this, and um, I was thinking about, in your first reference to the past, I think as we look back and we think about our traumas and our dramas and everything that have happened to us, as long as our mind goes there, we have this capacity to be able to sit in blame. And blame is an incredible way to avoid pain.
Yeah.
By its nature, it's like we're looking, it's outside of us rather than what our current experience is. And there's so much richness in the now. But the richness of being in the now means that we experience a gamut of emotion, and we value certain emotions over others. And we know how to be with certain emotions over others. And so by the nature of being addicted in a lot of ways to feeling good, we divert our attention from the now to the past or the future. And we rob ourselves of the opportunity to experience the gamut of what is right now, not recognizing that the experience of sadness, as an example, or which we might qualify as pain, is the only way that we can possibly experience joy. Because they're two sides of the same coin.
They absolutely are. And you brought up something really interesting with this concept, like this idea that one distraction is blame. And as you mentioned that, I started thinking of others. They're blame, anger, resentment, self-righteousness, pride, self-pity. These are all the states that we can put ourselves in to distract ourselves from what from dealing with our actual feelings about what's happening there. It's, and it's like a poison we carry with us when we're holding on to these states.
They become our armor.
Right. Our ego. They become our ego armor.
They become the armor that we walk around with in order to keep us, and I use my fingers in quotations, to keep us feeling safe. Because without them, we actually feel the vulnerability that exists within the current moment. And that's the depth and the breadth of what will actually move us forward if we can lean in.
Mm-hmm.
But instead, we operate on it feels like we operate at the surface of the water with this armor on us. And we get a false sense of control.
Yeah.
Why don't
Yeah.
we pause?
Yeah.
Why don't we
Let's pause
pause
here. Okay.
a minute or two and take a break, and then we'll come back and continue the conversation.
Okay.
Welcome back, everybody, and sorry for cutting you off, love. We were in the middle of talking about armor, and the last thing that I had said was that it gives us this false sense of control. And you were about to speak, so can I take you
Yeah.
back?
Yeah. The false sense of control, and what also the picture or false sense of safety, which is what armor is. It's just we put it on to survive the battle. And thinking of like its purpose, it's, we wear this armor because we believe we have these memories and traumas from the past that if we allow them in, they'll destroy us. We are not psychologically strong enough to handle them, so we armor up with blame and resentment and whatever it is. And again, the fear of the future that we need to armor up. And so this armor is all this fear-based mechanism, which some people would call the ego or the persona. And as we think about this, as I think about this in the context of pleasure seeking, the ego is fear-based and absolutely pushes us to distract ourselves from everything going on and keep us out of the present moment. That's what this armor is doing to us. It's the armor itself that's getting us to distract and pleasure seek. And we have to find freedom, break free and trust, find that freedom. Again, we have to find a way to push through these fears, which involves feeling our pain, feeling our feelings, understanding how much of our life is fear driven and facing it, knowing that we are strong enough to face it.
It's so interesting when I listen to you speak, and I hope I don't take us off our current path too much, anyways. But the interesting thing about armor is that we use it to protect ourselves. We use it to protect a fragility, a vulnerability, a deeply honest part of ourselves that has experienced pain. And the armor itself is almost like, it's like the web that a spider weaves. And it looks good. It looks strong. It looks wise even. It looks like what we think we want when people operate from their armored place. They play the part that we want to play. And that's where the armor is deceptive. Because we weave this web that looks incredible, and we fool ourselves into believing that we are strong and smart and we've got our shit together and we're in control. When the truth is, we're actually that scared little person underneath it all. And most people can't relate to the web. And so, as we said in an earlier podcast, armor begets armor. My armor begets your armor. And so, if I'm armored, you're going to armor up to be able to meet me. And at the end of the day, underneath it all, neither of us is actually experiencing joy. We're simply experiencing the vapidness that comes from not being in the now and actually vibrating at a very reactive, sympathetic level, trying really hard to protect ourselves. So inevitably, our systems are constantly being revved up rather than being able to relax, because there's no relaxing if you're not in the now. There's just pretending.
Yeah,
and
it's because we've
pretend.
as we've landed on this, the genesis of this armor is fear, either fear of the pain of the past or fear of the future. So the armor is fear-based itself. The more armor you have, the more fear you're on. So you're walking around like the knight with the shiny armor, but you're driven by 1,000 form of fears. You're living a fear-based life, and the more armor you have, the more fear you have. But putting on this persona that's not true. And it's, again, robbing you of the present moment, and a mental torture is what it is.
And inevitably then needing more and more and more pleasure to be able to feel something. Right? So how do we break this, you'll say mechanical, I said habitual pattern of seeking pleasure constantly versus actually experiencing the abundance that exists within the now, even if it doesn't feel good?
Well, using our metaphor, we need to take our armor off, because with the armor on, we can't experience the now. And so that's, in a sense, it's facing and processing and integrating the fears and the parts of us we're rejecting. I have a story. It's so interesting. It was a conversation with a very good friend last night that this basically came up naturally, and it was so synchronistic. I thought I would make a good story for the show. So the background is having this conversation with a very good friend. He stopped drinking 2 years ago, but he's still going through a very long and difficult divorce. Challenging to see his kids at times. House is gone, massive financial stress, nonstop legal bills, loss of so many friends that pick sides in it all. Like, this is not a unique situation. I think many people kind of relate to this themselves, or they've seen people go through this. And he stayed sober through all of this, which is in itself a miracle. So he's not been using that type of pleasure seeking device, but he's starting to recognize that to deal with his feelings and the discomfort that is continually come up, he's been doing other things. He's been heading out for runs all the time, climbing mountains, staying busy, lifting weights, like everything. Like this guy is like the Energizer buddy. He's so busy, and he's recognizing now he's been distracting himself for 2 years with all these other things that are much, much healthier. Like these, I mean, he looks great. He's feeling great, but that he's recognizing now that this worked for maybe 2 years, but it's catching up with them. And what I mean by that, the anger, the resentment, this disease, the mind, and he's realizing he's constantly needing a bigger distraction now. And he's saying, okay, I'm understanding this is running its course. What to do now? And the answer that we came up with and that showed up for us is be with the feelings, be with them. And here's when those feelings come up, and I use this particular example, is sit there and say, God, this is hard. It's so hard. It's been so hard for so long. God, I miss my kids. My heart wants to break in two for them. I feel so betrayed by the people I thought who loved me. I feel so abandoned and rejected by the world. And just sit with those feelings. They'll be so hard, but they'll pass. They always do. Your whole life, those feelings will pass. As you sit with them and integrate them, don't distract. Just be with those feelings. And as we continue to do that, and I honestly don't believe it takes that long because I've been through this process, what will happen next is what I'll call the miracle. Given time, my friend, I'm going to say it's going to be 2-3 weeks, my friend will start to think, God, that must have been so hard for my ex-wife and kids too. They must have been trying to survive just like me. I bet they were trying to do their best. And it must have been so hard for those friends that had to make a choice. God, I wish we hadn't put them through that, and so forth and so on. And all that anger and resentment that we've been carrying, repressing, and pushing down that have been driving us to distraction will be transformed into forgiveness, and we'll have an explosion of unconditional love. That's this particular example, but that's what I would call a dearmoring process, to be with our feelings. So I'll stop there.
If I take your dearmoring process, I'm going to come back to a tool actually to use in this moment, because you brought it up actually in a really beautiful way. But if I take your dearmoring process and I break it down, what I hear you saying is first step is we cut out all the distractions and we take space to be able to actually feel our feelings.
Yeah.
And create space for, allow our feelings to sweep in and take over on some level.
With radical honesty of what they are.
Yeah.
No brave face.
And from there, no brave face, which would be the armor.
Yeah.
And from there, what you speak to is, once I've met them and been with them, what begins to happen is that through being compassionate toward myself, by allowing myself to experience the feelings and meeting myself gently with them, I then invite compassion to exist within me for those around me, and on and on and on, which then brings me to a place of being able to forgive, break free, and move forward.
Yeah. Okay. And I'd add just one thing in the middle there, that before the developing the compassion, is the first thing that shows up is I have the ability to be with these feelings without distracting, and I'm still alive, and I'm still here, and I can do this, and I'm strong enough to do this. That was a lie I was telling myself. I can do this. It was hard, but I can do this.
So that piece feels really significant. So For the years that I was doing trauma work with people, one of the things that really shocked me, and it's interesting, it shocked me as a therapist, and then I got to experience it myself as a person. And it still shocks me, but I understand it better now, in hindsight, which is that we will do anything to avoid being with our pain.
Mm-hmm.
Like, we will kill ourselves
Yeah.
with behaviors that will literally kill ourselves versus riding the wave of pain, because we think that feeling that pain is equivalent to death. And we literally, in our nervous systems, we are that afraid of being with what is, anyways.
Yeah.
And, I remember it was a mentor of mine that said, nobody ever died from being with a feeling. And yet we'll kill ourselves over not feeling.
Well, because the fear of it's greater than the feeling itself. That's what we learn.
100%. And having ridden that wave that you're speaking with, literally watching people move through that wave of feeling those feelings and watching them reach their peak and then descend and settle. It's incredible to see what happens on the other side, which is literally this feeling of being a superhero. Like, you can make $1 million and it won't feel as good as actually sitting and feeling the thing that you don't want to be with and getting through it. You'll feel like a superhero. So I speak to that, one, because both through personal experience, my own, and then by watching others in my life, I will say that feeling your feelings is the only way to break free. The only way out is through, without question. And where it leads you, and Chris speaks to the idea of compassion, both for yourself and for others, and then into forgiveness, is absolute freedom. I would love in this moment, just because you brought it up and you actually spoke it in some ways so beautifully, I'd love to just share a very quick tool that
Mhm.
Kristen Neff speaks to, as she relates to this. And Kristen Neff is a psychologist who works deeply with self-compassion. And she developed something called the self-compassion break, which is exactly on some levels what Chris spoke to, which is in the moment of experiencing an uncomfortable feeling, taking the moment to put your left hand on your heart and your right hand on top and actually acknowledge the feeling, which is like, as you said, I'm feeling really afraid right now, or I'm feeling really ashamed right now, or I'm feeling really angry right now. Actually naming it and acknowledging it instead of ignoring it and owning it. And with your hands on your heart, this stance in and of itself actually releases hundreds of chemicals in your brain that create a feeling of safety and nurturing and being cared for. And then, after we've acknowledged it, recognize that there's a common humanity in that. I'm not the only person that feels anger or sadness or fear. These are emotions that connect us as human beings. They're real for all of us. They sit under all of our masks all the time. So being able to actually name that too is, I'm not alone in this. I'm connected to a web of people who have experienced fear before. I'm not alone. And then in this moment, as I'm experiencing this feeling, what can I do to tend to myself gently? Which doesn't mean I'm going to turn my head away from my experience, but rather, how can I sink into this experience and take care of myself in the process? So, could that mean I pour myself a cup of tea and I sit down quietly? It could mean I'm going to sit with this feeling and I'm going to journal about it. It could mean I'm going to take a bath. It could mean I'm going to go for a walk and learn how to be with this feeling. But those 3 steps are an incredible way to begin to be with an uncomfortable feeling and tend to yourself through the process. They worked for me. I remember years ago a therapist talking to me about self-compassion, and the words didn't make sense. I actually couldn't compute. What does it actually mean to meet myself in these feelings that I have armored myself from feeling with compassion? And this exercise worked miracles for me. It's called the self-compassion break, and it's Kristen Neff that developed it.
Beautiful. It's a great tool.
Are there other tools that you use with people to help them ride those waves?
There's one aspect of this armor and fear that's a little bit it shows up as a feeling, but it's a little bit different. It's this psychological future fear of things that are going to happen in the future that are out of my control. That's something that one of the tools I use with the people I work with is we call it playing the tape on it. Okay. Instead of sitting with that fear and not knowing what to do and having it paralyze you, let's play the tape of it comes true. And I'm going to keep asking you questions on it about what happens. And, here's an example I'll use with myself as I work. I have fears too. We all do. But say a big one that many people have is a fear of financial failure. We got to saved all this money. It's here. What happens if the stock market collapses? What happens if this? What happens if that? and I recognize it's such a silly fear because first of all, it's probably not going to happen. But why instead of just saying that to myself and pushing it away and distracting myself, I move into, well, what if it does happen? Okay, what if tomorrow we wake up and for whatever reason our house is burned down, bank accounts been drained, and the stock market's collapsed, and I have nothing again. Well, I'm going to be okay because I've been okay every day in my life. No matter what's happened, I might be uncomfortable, I might be in pain, but I've always been okay. And what would I do? Well, I've been in tough situations before. I've been in a really tough situation 5 years ago, and I found my way out of that. And my experience out of that was a tremendous amount of personal growth as I learned I could overcome all these obstacles. So if this was to happen, well, I'd go out and I'd find a way to make a living, and I'd find a way to make more money. I'd find a way to rebuild, and actually that might actually be exciting. That might really motivate me and push me, and I might learn something about myself I didn't know before. And it doesn't take very long before I actually get excited of it maybe happening. I'm not afraid of it anymore. I'm not wishing it happened, but if it happens, like I'd be okay. I can do that. And if I take my list of fears and I do that with all of them, I find that very quickly I'm over all those fears and I don't think about it.
So, what's the difference between meeting that and overcoming those fears and seeing those obstacles and overcoming them and meeting them and feeling them and finding your way through them?
I think because it's hard to meet something that's not true. It's hard to meet something it's thinking this idea of psychological time. You're trying to meet with something that hasn't happened and probably won't happen. And it's just the unknown. And so you're trying to condition yourself or break the conditioning that the unknown's bad. I mean, the whole present moment is the unknown. The whole mystery and joy of life is meeting the next step and not knowing what's going to happen. But we've habitually fallen this path. We try to plan out our day to make sure we know what's going to happen and fear the unknown. But joy comes from the unknown. I use this example all the time. When we go to see a movie at the movie theater, we don't spend 2 hours before reading the script so we know what's going to happen. We don't want to know what's going to happen. We go to the movie theater, we want to be surprised for 2 hours, and we find joy in that. Yet we go out and live our lives wanting to know what's going to happen next and wanting to control the situation. So it's dismantling that type of fear.
So, I'm conscious of time and we're coming to an end. And I want to bring us back to this idea of pleasure seeking, which is how we started this, because we've moved And so really talking about armoring
Pain
and
avoidance.
pain avoidance. And I think that there is, I think this whole idea of pleasure seeking is really worth exploring. We, at the end of the day, until we wake up our witness conscience or our observer, we don't have the capacity to actually notice what's happening in our lives. We're just sort of, we're going. And as soon as we're able to wake up our observer, we're able to notice a lot. And if we can meet ourselves without judgment, we begin to see how we're making choices. And the choices that we make ultimately, well, they set the course of our lives. We can always change that. But I get to, in any given moment, make a choice that's going to move me into a deeper sense of joy or going to give me permission to escape my current reality. And I think that in a lot of ways, what we're speaking about when we're talking about pleasure seeking is how to get out of the present moment, how to get out of what is right now in order to acquire something better, a feeling, an experience, something that's bigger, brighter, and different than what is. And the truth is that the more we do that over and over and over again, the more we're simply in an act of avoidance, and the less rich our lives actually are, even though if on the surface they end up looking glimmery and bright. Yes? You
Yeah,
following me?
I'm following you.
So I come back to this idea that a dear friend of mine named Michael Talbot Kelly spoke to, and it was this whole idea of Freedom Mountain, which I've mentioned before. Freedom, breaking free, doesn't look like always making the best choices that keep you in the here and now. Breaking free is recognizing that you are not stuck in the mechanical, habitual, but actually you have choice in any given moment to either choose discomfort or choose comfort. And choosing discomfort will inevitably lead to growth. Choosing comfort often keeps us where we are.
And yeah, and what it dawned the image on me that the central message of Christianity is the crucifixion and the resurrection story. And the central message there, and there's all sorts of meanings in these stories, and I'm going to focus on the metaphysical meaning of it, which is absolutely as valid as the other reasons. Is the only way to finding peace and joy, the kingdom of heaven on earth, is through the cross. There's no other way. Jesus was the way, the light, and the truth. And it's metaphorically saying we have this conditioned, fear-based ego structure that's robbing us of being in the present moment and finding the kingdom that is right here, right now, inside of us. And the only way you're going to experience it is you have to put yourself up on this proverbial cross, which is you have to be willing to have, the ego death or take off the armor and be totally exposed to the present moment in the here and now. And if we do that, then we'll find heaven on earth, which is the joy and peace that ultimately we're all looking for. But it's very specific. There is no a way around it. We have to go through.
So just before we close, for those of you that don't necessarily relate to the cross or Christianity, what Chris really is saying is the only way to freedom is to face yourself head on.
Yeah.
It's to fully look yourself in the mirror and see the things that you have spent your life avoiding and find a way to meet them with compassion and create space for them to move through and recognize that they're a part of you, just like they're a part of everybody else. and then move beyond allowing them to run your life.
Yeah.
And then you get to actually experience deep joy. And that's not a constant state. We move in and out of states. But you get to experience life without constantly needing to move beyond what is, and actually find richness in what is, even if what is sometimes dark and hard.
Thanks, Jacqueline. That's a great way to close as we're finding ourselves at a time. But we have an announcement. Going forward, we are going to be taking call-ins for our shows. The number to call in if you want to ask us a question on our next show is 1-800-930-2819. So have that handy for our next show on June 9th. And the number is 1-800-930-2819. And we'll see you then. You've been listening to me, Chris.
And me, Jacqueline, on Break Free and Trust, a redesign for living.
Tune in every second and fourth Monday at 3 p.m. on Transformation Talk Radio for more real conversations about life, death, and everything in between.
Learn to connect with your intrinsic power to grow and heal, how to laugh at your own humanness and not take life too seriously.
Through healthy conversations between the feminine and the masculine, you will learn how to harness the power of relationship and the mirror to befriend your shadow, and to trust that any obstacle that gets in your way is there to help you grow.
For more information or to connect with us personally, visit theway-healing.com. That's theway-healing.com.